So I caught wind of this story over the weekend. Florida prosecutor seeks to clear records of people charged with buying police-made crack in the 1980s. Fort Lauderdale, Florida. A Florida prosecutor says he'll seek to vacate as many as 2,600 convictions of people who bought crack cocaine manufactured by the Broward County Sheriff's Office for sting operations between 1988 and 1990. The Florida Supreme Court ruled in 1993 that people couldn't be charged in cases where the sheriff's office made the crack cocaine and undercover deputies then sold it to buyers who were arrested and charged. So they ruled in 1993 that you couldn't charge people with this because apparently it had been a practice for a while that they were making their own crack. Broward County State Attorney Harold F. Pryor said Friday that while his office was reviewing old records, prosecutors realized that many people still have criminal charges or convictions on their records because of the sting operation. It's never too late to do the right thing, Pryor said in a statement. It's just one example of how the crack cocaine epidemic of the 1980s and early 90s led to harsh police practices. Harsh! They describe the police cooking their own crack, selling it to people, and arresting them for buying it as harsh. They describe that as harsh. And heavy criminal penalties. Some people may have been Some people may have been convicted of serious felonies because they bought drugs within 1,000 feet of a school. So, that means that the Broward County Sheriff's Office cooked crack, gave it to police officers undercover to sell to people 1,000 feet from a school. They gave undercover police officers crack to sell 1,000 feet from a school, and then arrested and convicted people for buying the crack 1,000 feet from the school that the police were selling the crack that they made. Conviction under that law required at the time that defendants be sentenced to at least 3 years in prison for buying the police-made crack by the school. They were arresting people for not for selling, but for purchasing. Ed Hogue, a defense lawyer, told the Sun Sentinel of Fort Lauderdale. At the time, Hogue was a public defender who represented Leon Williams, whose appeal led to the state Supreme Court outlawing the practice. Wow. Glad it's at some point in the court system somebody finally decided that this was not okay to do, was to cook crack in the sheriff's office and then sell it to people and then arrest them for buying it. Arrest people who are addicted to drugs for buying the drugs that you made. I'm glad the Supreme Court weighed in at some point and decided that maybe that's not the right way to do things. Maybe this ought to be outlawed. They had detention deputies posing as dealers, Hogue said. They would sell it, and these poor people who were addicts were buying it. And they were selling it within 1,000 feet of schools, so the penalties would be greater. Fucked up. The sheriff's office said at the time it began making crack because it didn't have enough of the seized drug to use in its sting operations, and because it didn't have to later test the cocaine content of crack made by a sheriff's office chemist. Wow. So they didn't have enough crack to do the sting operations where they wanted to arrest people for buying crack. They didn't have enough, you see. So they decided what we should do is we should just make the crack. We should just make the crack because we don't have enough crack to sell to people who we're going to arrest for buying crack. And then also the bonus for us as the sheriff's office is now we don't have to test it. We don't have to spend the taxpayers' money testing the crack that we're arresting people for buying because we already know it's real because we made it. That's the reason. That's the reason. God damn it. We find that the law enforcement's conduct here was so outrageous as to violate Florida's due process clause. Well, thank you very much. The state Supreme Court wrote in the decision. Pryor said he notified Broward County Sheriff Gregory Tony that Pryor would ask judges to vacate the convictions. Pryor said Tony supports the plan. Some defendants may also be able to seal or expunge their records. Some, you say, which means that some people who were arrested and convicted for buying crack that the sheriff's office made may not be able to get their convictions expunged, is what that says. This review will take a considerable amount of time. Why? Why? How much time do you need to figure out whether or not you should take that off of somebody's record? How much time do you need to do that? He said his office will contact people who may be affected. Wow. So there's some gross news for you there. The sheriff's office was cooking crack. So obviously this is absurd. Obviously absurd. I've heard a lot about cops planting drugs on people. You go back to the old Dave Chappelle bit where he says sprinkle some crack on them. Like, obviously, there have been many instances of police planting drugs in people's cars, on people's persons. Like this is a thing. This is a fucked up thing that we know has happened. I never, and maybe I'm just naive, maybe I'm just slow, but I never imagined that they would get the crack that they sprinkled on to people in planted places by cooking it. I never imagined that there would be a sheriff's office where they cooked their own crack. I'm very curious how this sheriff's county's office, like, how did this meeting go? Where some sheriff's deputy or the sheriff themselves had this bright idea, like, hey, you know, we could just we could make it. And were they nervous to say it? Did it sound crazy leaving their lips? Was there an argument? Was there a debate? Or were they just like, by Job, I think you've got it. We'll cook it ourselves. And I like, who was the sheriff at the time? Like, what was the goal here? All of this to me needs a lot of unpacking. Once you decide to do this, where exactly do you get the recipe? Like, who teaches you how to cook the crack? Is somebody on the staff already secretly really good at cooking crack? Why would that be? Or do you have to arrest somebody who sells crack and get this information out of them somehow? And then what do you reward them with for giving you this information? And then obviously they're very concerned with it being real crack. They're very concerned with it being real crack. But how do you know if the crack's any good? How do you test the crack? Do they have informant crackheads that they give it to? Do they give out test crack? Do they have a crack focus group where they passed around some rocks and had people do a survey? Maybe somebody raised their hand and said, you know, this rock doesn't burn as long enough as a normal rock, and then somebody writes that down on a notepad and then takes it back to the laboratory where they try to get the crack recipe better. Is that how that happened? How do you test the crack? And I have this other question too. If you're gonna sell it to crackheads and you're gonna arrest them for buying it, why does it even need to be real? Why does it need to be real? Why couldn't it be fucking sugar cubes? I don't know what fake crack looks like, but I'm sure there have been pounds and pounds and pounds and pounds of fake crack made in the world. If you're going to arrest people right after they buy it, why does the crack need to be real? What reason does the crack need to be the genuine article if you're gonna arrest people right after they buy it? And when you think about all of this too, where it leaves me is that I feel like this is a TV show. This is the log line for the TV show. Okay, this is a 1 hour drama on HBO Max. The log line is a sheriff's department in the 90s. In a sheriff's department in 1990s Miami decides to cook crack, right? So then the show will be like, it'll be like Breaking Bad, right? Because you're cooking drugs. It'll be like The Wire because you're arresting people for drugs. It'll be like The Bear, right? Because there's a kitchen. There's a kitchen. Can you think of a more high pressure kitchen than where you got to cook crack in the sheriff's office? You can't keep up with the orders. The thing's got to be up to code. You got to get the recipe right. And it'll be like Snowfall, a show that I've never seen, but it sounds like if it's in the 80s and 90s and it's about crack, it'll be like Snowfall. And all those shows are, thank you for the gifted submarine. Or, no, thank you for continuing. I'm not sure, but either way, thank you, Jim Heine, and thank you, President Prescott Moon. It'd be like Snowfall, a show that I have not seen, but if it's about the 80s and 90s and crack cocaine, then it would seem like that's a good fit. And all of those shows are very popular. So I say we make this and we make it a comedy. Like we make this sheriff's office like the cast of Reno 911 and have them doing the most heinous shit you can think of. And on this, I'll end with this. This made me think about Joe Biden. Mr. Joe Biden, you have to pardon all these people. You have to pardon all these people. If you're going to pardon your son, and I don't have a problem with you pardoning your son, but if you're going to pardon your son, you should pardon the people who may be currently incarcerated for buying crack that the sheriff's office cooked and was sold to them near a school because that's where the sheriff's office put the undercover agents to sell it. If you're going to pardon your son, then you should pardon those people too. Because Joe Biden was part of the criminal justice reform that made penalties for crack harsher than penalties for normal cocaine to begin with. He was a part of all of that. So part of the reason why these penalties are what they are is because of legislation that was pushed by Joe Biden over his career as a lawmaker. So if you're going to pardon your dumbass fuck up son, and I'm, look, I have enough empathy to know that Hunter Biden had been through some bullshit. He's also done a bunch of bullshit. And I understand a father wanting to do that for their son. But if you're going to do that, if you're going to act in your family's best interest, then you should extend some of that grace to people who have been fucked over by a system that you helped create. And that is all. Like and subscribe, homie, friend. It's free. Stop playing.